Ever since I saw this picture a few months ago, taken around 1918, of a young woman knitting one sock inside of the other on double-pointed needles, I've been driven to make myself a pair using this somewhat old-fashioned method. Many thanks to the Museum of History and Industry in Seattle for sharing this picture on the internet. The method has been improved upon much by the two circular and magic loops methods, because with this particular one inside the other method, it's relatively easy to accidentally join the two socks together with one stitch. It's not a beginner sock method. I recommend that your first pair of socks on DPNs be done singly before attempting this method. So give yourself a chance to grasp the basics before attempting to combine two socks. Stacy at verypink.com has some great videos for first-time sock makers. Now, if you've made basic socks before, my previous warning shouldn't deter you from attempting this method, as you've already grasped the basics, and it's quite easy to unjoin the socks, which I will show you how to do in a later video. Now, although there are written instructions available on Knitty.com and in a past edition of Traditional Knits magazine, and there are certainly a few brief videos on YouTube, I wasn't able to find instructions detailed and visual enough for my very limited knitting skill level. So with much help from the wonderful Bonnie at Beehive Wool Shop in Victoria, Canada, I am pleased to be able to bring you a series of short how-to videos for making two-in-one socks, one inside the other, on double-pointed needles or DPNs. To begin with, you'll cast on from two separate skeins of yarn on two separate DPNs. One for each sock. I'm just going to move this up a little bit because I think that'll center it a little bit better. Now, I cast on these stitches using a long tail cast on method over two needles so that it's a nice elastic cast on. I used different colors so that you can distinguish between the two socks. Another of my preferred methods, for larger calves in particular, is Knit Fish's World's Most Elastic Cast On that you can find on YouTube. Be warned, it takes practice and patience, but it's worth it. Now, for demonstration purposes, I'm using a worsted weight yarn and larger DPNs rather than the typical sock weight yarn and the 2.25 millimeter DPNs that I would normally use to make basic socks. I'm not using a pattern, but I'm making very small, short pair of relatively unusable socks just for demonstrating the steps. It's not meant to be followed exactly as a pattern because at the end you're going to have a really odd looking pair of tube-like sockettes. If you were really knitting socks, it would look more like this. Now, to get the socks on one set of DPNs, you pick up the stitches purlwise from the first cast on and then from the second. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take out this second needle. I'm going to move my stitches to the end and I'm going to start picking up stitches to get them together on one DPN, or on 4 DPNs in this case, because that's what my preferred method is. You should follow the pattern that you're using. This is not a pattern again. So you decide which is going to be your front sock and which is going to be your back sock. Red for the front, blue for the back for this demonstration. I pick off a stitch purlwise for the front, one for the back. And it helps if you line up your needles so that you're not pulling stitches off inadvertently. One from the front, one from the back, front, back, front, and back. And I believe I have 4 stitches from each sock, the front sock, the red sock, and the back sock, the blue sock. I'm going to grab another DPN and do the same thing. Front, back, front, back, front, back, front, and back. And that's DPN number 2 with 4 stitches from each sock on it. Front, back, front, back, front, back, front, back, and I believe that's another 4 stitches. And last but not least, needle number 4. That one's going to try and fall out, so I'll just get it under the table so that it doesn't. Front, back, front, back, front, and finally back. Okay. Now, as you've made socks before on DPNs, if you're watching this video to this point, you move your yarn to the back, make sure that your needles have all of the seams to the center. I think I've twisted that up somehow. Nope. There we go. Finally got it. So we have our seams all to the center, we have our yarn at the back, along with our tails, which are getting in the way. Now to start, we're going to do ribbing. I'm going to do one row of ribbing. I probably won't do the whole row in this video because I'll probably run out of room. I'm going to start on needle number 1 by knitting the front sock, which is the red sock. Now to knit, I have to have the working yarn at the back, so that's where it is. I'm going to grab it. If I can find it, that's the tail, that's not the working yarn, that won't be very useful. Grab the working yarn and knit your first stitch. As you know, if you've done this before, it's always awkward the first few rows. When you're finished knitting with the front sock, you bring your yarn back to the front to rest. That's the tip. That's the trick of knitting 2 socks together on DPNs. You keep your yarn when it's resting where it should be, either at the front or at the back, depending on which sock it belongs to. I'm going to knit the next stitch, which is the first stitch of the back or the inside sock. And I'm going to leave my yarn at the back. Now I'm ready to purl the second stitch of my front sock. My yarn is already in position in the front, so I purl it and I leave it at the front because that's where it rests when it's not being used. I bring my back yarn to the front to purl. I'll try and lose that one. And I put it to the back where it's resting. Now I'm ready to knit my third stitch, or rather my third stitch on my front sock. I bring it back to the front to rest. I knit the third stitch on the inside or back sock and leave my yarn at the back to rest. I'm purling the fourth stitch of my front sock. I leave it at the front to rest because it's the front or the outside sock. Bring my yarn forward to purl this sock, the inside sock, and I leave my yarn at the back to rest. Now you get the idea. The next video is going to do a row or 2 of stockinette, and then I will follow that by picking up stitches to do a heel flap, or heel flaps in this case, and turning the heels.